Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today we are looking at something that is pretty special. Now, what's the reason that I think this is so special? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I think that this knife right here is the very best example of an Elijah Isham design that you can get on the market today. So if you like Elijah Isham, if you want to buy one of his knives and you're not sure which one, I'm going to argue that this one is the very best option out of all the collaborations that Isham has done. And he's done a lot of them, and a lot of them are really cool, but I argue that this one is the best. So stick with me and I will explain to you exactly why I feel that is the case. All right, so let's take what we have here is a very, very cool looking knife. It's almost like a piece of artwork. It's almost like a sculpture, which is very typical of Elijah Isham's knives. However, what often happens when you get a knife that is very maximized toward the form end of the function form, slider there, is you often end up with something that's not highly usable. So look guys, this knife is beautiful, it's intricate, it's detailed, it's different, it's cool, and yet it has a lot more going for it. So this is a knife that, yes, you can absolutely buy because you love the look of it, and it is absolutely a beautiful knife, no question. However, what this knife doesn't do, that is often something that, knives that look really interesting and artistic do, is ask you to sacrifice functionality. All right, but this one doesn't, okay? And it doesn't even ask you to sacrifice a huge price point. And so let me work my way through this knife, tell you all about it, tell you the things that I think it's doing well, and at the end we'll see if I've convinced you that this is the best Elijah Isham design out there. So starting off with size and weight, this guy is basically 8 inches long. It's just a hair under at 7 15/16. The blade length is 3.5 inches. 4.5 inches on the handle, 3.5 inch grip area up here, plus this 3/4 of an inch of choil. And finally, the weight is 3.2 ounces. So 3.2 ounces for an 8-inch knife is fantastic. And when you're carrying this knife, it honestly feels like it's not even there. This knife carries beautifully. It's just fantastic from that standpoint. And so you're carrying a knife that weighs almost nothing, that takes up very little space in your pocket, and yet when you take it out and deploy it and go to use it to cut something, you've got a very capable 3.5 inches of cutting edge and a knife that fits in hand well enough that you can really get some work done. And so size and weight, I think, is a huge win here. They've done a great job of maximizing the amount of cutting power that I get for a very lightweight, very slim, almost unnoticeable knife. Let's go ahead and take a look at that blade. As I said, 3.5 inches there, and it's full 3.5 inches of cutting edge. You can sort of see the way this is designed so that the cutting edge comes right back here to where the handle is. Really, really thin blade. Now, I will say that's about my only real complaint about this knife. This blade stock is quite thin. It's a good bit, it's a good bit under 1/8 of an inch. And to me, that's a little bit too thin. Maybe it's 3/32 or something around that department. Now, that does make it an extremely good slicer. And in terms of, my EDC type of tasks, especially for, I would consider this a lighter duty knife. Okay, I wouldn't call it heavy duty, and largely it's because that very thin blade grind or very thin blade stock. D2 steel, satin finish. This cuts really, really well, and being D2, it holds an edge really nicely. And of course, satin finish D2 is, if you're gonna leave D2 uncoated, it should be done with a satin finish because it's going to help a little bit with corrosion resistance. So yeah, really, really nice blade. Great budget steel, well done. I mean, slices like a laser. Really, really nice. Okay, so the blade is good. My only complaint about this blade is I feel like it's a little too thin. Otherwise, everything about it is fantastic. Moving on now to lockup and deployment. Now, this is an area where I've had some struggles with Elijah Isham's knives before. This flipper placement I really don't love. I think even in this case, the knife would work better if you just tipped it back. Now, I know that would make it not be so different and so interesting. And so the flipper tab being there is a bit of a sacrifice to form over function. However, in this case, it's not much of a sacrifice because it functions really, really well. And to my knowledge, that's been the case for most people who have this knife. Now, the problem is, if you get that detent just a little too stiff with this flipper tab configuration, it's going to be extremely uncomfortable. And so they've got this dialed in just right. I guess I would have that slight concern that, yeah, if you got one with the detent that was a little too stiff, it could be almost unusable. This one is perfect, and I think most of them are. And I will say that's the next thing about, lockup and deployment here is really, really nice. So very, very smooth action. Even with a light blade, it'll drop shut like that. So I will say, I think lockup, deployment, access to the lock bar here is all really, really nice. There is, of course, the potential issue of the detent being too stiff, but this one is just fine. That's the only hiccup with these little flipper tabs. If the detent is not exactly right, they're nearly impossible to use. You can see, again, they've done sort of an internal-ish stop pin where the stop pin is riding in the blade through that sort of smile-shaped groove in the frame and stops up there. Interesting choice, and I think it works very, very well in this configuration. I've got to say this about, we're kind of moving into construction anyway. I'm very happy with the action on this knife. So let's move on to construction, and I do want to point this out. They've done a great job of maximizing blade to handle ratio here. Normally I talk about that at the beginning, and I kind of alluded to it, but I want to make that very clear. Tons of cutting edge for a knife of this size. And that is a huge win. Now, let's talk about the other components of the construction here. Of course, we've already talked about the D2 steel. Stainless steel bearings on the pivot here, and I kind of wish that it was ceramic, especially at the higher price point. Considering you can get Civivis that cost less than this that have ceramic, that's a little disappointing. Nice, heavily milled out liner. Now I did have this question, and that was, do you get a bunch of flex in there? And I'll try to show you guys. I'm pushing pretty hard right now, and you can maybe see a little bit of movement, but it's barely perceivable. And again, like I pointed out, the blade stock is quite thin here, so I do not consider this a heavy use knife anyway. But it's definitely amply strong to do what it needs to do. And of course, all that milling does reduce the weight by an awful lot. We've got G10 with the carbon fiber here, and I think the carbon fiber is what you're paying a little extra for. And that's okay, but I'm not in love with this carbon fiber overlay where, essentially it's a carbon fiber sticker. And, it's fine, and it does make the knife look really, really cool, but could you have done this perhaps with layered G10 or something else and achieved the same effect for a lower price point? Probably so. All right, that's not it's not a huge complaint, but it is a little bit of a complaint. I'm not in love with the cheap carbon fiber. Generally, if you're spending less than $200 and you're getting carbon fiber, I'm not going to like it. There are a couple of companies that have done it right. This one is okay, but it's not amazing. So lastly, when we're talking about the handle, we need to bring up the ergonomics. And the ergonomics on this back here are good, but not amazing. It's certainly comfortable, but I feel like I'm kind of reaching for the blade. Now, up here, I really, really like it. And so in my use, I've used this knife almost exclusively in this grip. A little bit back here if I'm cutting on a block of cheese or something like that, but most of the time I've been getting right up here on the finger choil at the front. The pocket clip is really good, and it is movable, highly functional clip, carries very, very deep, and as I've said a couple of times already, this knife carries like it's not even there, which I think is a huge win. Finally, let's get to some comparisons. And I will have to point out that in these comparisons, we're not going to get knives that what would you say? We're not going to get knives that are quite as stylish. I do have one that's pretty nice here. This is the fairly new mass drop release in collaboration with Orcs Bladeworks and Riot. This is the Orca, similar in size, but notice even how much more cutting edge you're getting on the Civivi. Now this is a pretty expensive knife, so they're not super comparable. Here's another, more budget-friendly knife, 14C28N on the steel. Fantastic action. So this is a knife, this Real Steel Griffin. I think these go for around 50 to 60 bucks, and they have roller bearings. It is absolutely fantastic. Just one of the best actions in a budget knife you will ever find. What else have we got here? Real steel lantern, steel will lantern, similar construction, similar, it's a G10 liner lock with D2 steel, a little bit cheaper on the lantern, and this is going to be a little more heavy duty. So if you're looking for just a knife in this category, if it's not all about the Isham design, then you might want to go this route, because this is going to be a little heavy duty, or a little more heavy duty. Wow, don't know why that was so hard to say, but you're gonna notice in the pocket. Okay, this is a little heavier to carry. Let's see, let's bring in a buck 110 just because everyone's familiar with the size on that. And of course, this is the SK Blades buck 110, a beautiful, in fact, the most beautiful example of a buck 110 that I am aware of. And I would highly recommend you go check out the SK Blades website and pick yourself up one if you want a nice, really nice buck 110. What else can we throw in here? Real Steel Control, another D2 bearing, budget-ish knife. This is, of course, the White Mountain Knives exclusive. So if you're watching this, by the way, go over to White Mountain Knives. You can use my discount code to pick one of these guys up and save yourself a little bit of money. These are over there as well. I think that's about all the comparisons I've got for you. The fact is, this is not a knife that lends itself to comparisons because it's so different. It's a very design-oriented knife, and it really excels at that because it's a beautiful piece of functional artwork that does function very well, right? This is a beautiful knife. It absolutely is. But in carrying it, you don't sacrifice all the stuff that we're often asked to sacrifice for a beautiful knife, okay? It looks different, it looks space age, it looks interesting, and yet it carries perfectly, right? It feels great in hand. It has tons of cutting edge. It's just a huge win, I think, for Civivi. And again, I'm going to submit, I'm still going with it. This is the best Elijah Isham design on the market today because it gives you all the Elijah Isham awesomeness at a reasonable price and in a form that is absolutely usable as an EDC cutting tool. Thanks for watching. That's all I've got for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to use those links down in the description box to White Mountain Knives where I got this, and that way you can save yourself 10% off and help the channel. We'll talk to you later.